Hi folks, Chuck here again with 5 more books that I think you should read that I love, that don't seem to get a lot of love online unless I'm looking in the wrong places. So the first one is Alan Campbell's Scar Knight. This is one of 3 books that got me back into reading fantasy. Basically after I'd kind of given up on fantasy a long time before that. No hate to people who love this sort of thing, but epic fantasy is something I really drifted away from in my early teens. I, never got into Lord of the Rings and things like that. I'd love The Hobbit and things like that when I was growing up as a child. But just so much of the stuff that was out there seemed to be same old, same old. It was all starting to feel derivative. Yes, I know there was original stuff out there, but I certainly wasn't seeing it. And then around the same time, Peter V. Brett's book, the Painted Man, otherwise known as The Watered Man, came out. Dido Street Station by China Mayville, and this one here, Scar Knight by Alan Campbell. The thing that all 3 have in common, because they are very different books, but it's that they've got a completely unique fantasy landscape and location. It's not really derived from epic fantasy or from anything that's gone before, like your Tolkien-esque stuff. It's all very, very different. I mean, John Mayville's stuff was very much kind of steampunky fantasy, although it goes well beyond that. Peter V. Brett's was sort of, far future apocalyptic fantasy in which, all the world is now made up of societies that are loosely based on societies we've seen in the past. You've got your feudal society and your Islamic society and things like that, and a whole kind of wholly unique system of magic and monsters and so on and so forth. Scar Knight, it's basically about a city that is built on a massive wodge of stone that is held by chains over a seemingly bottomless pit. That's the world we're presented with. And into this comes a fallen angel. It's terrific. It's amazing reading. There were a couple in the series, and this one is certainly the strongest of the series. And I absolutely love it. It's unique. Hadn't read anything like it before. Haven't read anything like it since. But I would urge you to go and give this one a go. Zan, which from the cover you can immediately tell is from kind of the period of lurid paperback covers and what have you. I think this might have been early 90s. I probably should have checked that before I picked this up. 86. Okay, yep. That pans. This is the same author who did all of the Amtrak War science fiction stories. But this is a standalone science fiction horror novel that, again, I never see mentioned online, even though science fiction horror seems to be something that's really, really strong at the moment. It's basically about an utterly inimical alien intelligence that crash lands in small town rural America and basically lays waste to the locals. It's utterly bleak. It's almost cosmic in a way, because the titular creature isn't evil. It's just so much more developed than humans are that it doesn't see them as anything other than either tools to be used or slight annoyances in its way. And that holds up right through to the end. And yeah, don't look for any happy endings in this. It's really, really brutal and terrifying. And even though we do see inside the mind of the main protagonist, who is also the antagonist, there's very little there that you can glom onto to get to build any sort of sympathy or empathy with it. It's a ruthless creature just trying to survive and get back to where it needs to go, and it doesn't care what it has to do it. Really terrifying stuff. And I mean, I don't think it's still in print. I think it's something you have to kind of try and find online, but I would recommend, if you love a really good science fiction horror story, this is a really good science fiction horror story. One of my all-time favorite books, and I think one of the greatest pieces of science fiction horror ever written, if not the greatest, The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, which of course has been filmed multiple times as Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's terrifying on so many levels. I mean, the idea of an alien invasion is terrifying. And perhaps if you've only seen the movies and you haven't read the books, the book, it's hard to really get across how frightening this must have been when it came out in the 50s, when America was in the group of Reds under the beds, and you know watching for the foreigner and what have you, because it feeds right into that, the idea that your friends, your neighbors, your loved ones, your family, your children might not be who you think they are. It's the same sort of idea that comes up in John Carpenter's The Thing, which was based on the novella, Who Goes There by John W. Campbell, that the person sitting next to you who you might have known for 50 years is no longer that person, which is a terrifying thought. And I think it was Stephen King in one of his non-fiction books also made the point that what's especially terrifying about the pod people, as they've come to be coined in sort of popular, pop culture, is not that they're invading. It's the fact that they pretend to be people, but they don't have our emotions. They don't have our desires and our wants. All they are doing is living and surviving, which means that when they encroach on Earth, and indeed probably any planet they invade, once they've moved in and the guise of humanity is no longer useful, they are just going to sit on their porches day after day and live. They're not going to fix things. They're not going to take joy in beauty. They're just going to exist, which is a really disturbing concept. They're not after power. They're not after our resources or anything like that. They just want to exist, and unfortunately that means destroying humanity in order to be able to do that. They're not evil. They're not even particularly aggressive. They just do what they do. Terrifying stuff. Now, here's an Australian children's classic, The Nargin and the Stars. If you're from overseas, I don't know whether you would have ever heard of this. It's a fantasy novel about a child who loses his parents and goes to stay with relatives in the Australian bush, and comes across a whole sort of menagerie of fantasy creatures that live down there. Some of which are playful, some of which are helpful. One of which is deadly and aggressive. It's a terrific read. All of the creatures in here, which are based upon what feels like Indigenous mythology, Dreamtime mythology, are completely invented, but they sound like they're Indigenous creatures. And it's a terrific read. It's a really beautiful, haunting, scary bit of fantasy that I've reread as an adult and loved as much as I did as a kid. And finally, Handling the Undead by John Ajvide Lindqvist, who has written a whole bunch of stuff. He was the original author of Let the Right One In, about the vampire novel about vampires that are forever left children. This was his take on zombies, and I read this at a time when there was a huge amount of zombie stuff hitting the market, and it's great. It's unique. It's terrifying. It's also utterly traumatic and sad. In the same way that some ghost stories are about loss, this is very much about loss. And it's basically about an event, I think it's Oslo or Stockholm that it takes place in. Lindqvist being a Swedish writer, where within a certain area, all the recently deceased are brought back to life. And at first they're just shells. They're shambling shells. They don't do anything. They don't even move around particularly, so shambling's probably incorrect. They just exist. And of course, people who have recently lost them have to go through the trauma of having them back again, which is painted really, really vividly. And then things start to happen that are incredibly unsettling, and again, and on another level, also go more towards, pushing the trauma that all of these poor people have already dealt with, having to, bury loved ones, children even. I remember reading this the first time and crying at the end of it. It's that kind of book, and one I would very much recommend to anyone. But particularly if you like a good zombie story, but you're looking for something a bit different than your kind of average apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic zombie tale, please give it a go. It's magnificent. And that's it for this time around. What are some books that you think don't get enough love out there that you absolutely love? Drop a comment down below. Let me know. I love to hear about this sort of stuff.